chug, 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 chug,
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Wizard Staff Podcast. I'm your host Blake.
And I'm Guy.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We do drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when you're playing children's card games. So, tonight we are talking about the rest of the Zendikar Rising set review.
Woo!
Yes, in part one we talked about what Zendikar was, like how the plane exists, as well as the legendary creatures that were within that set. But now we are in part 2, and we're talking about the cards that go in the main deck, the 99, if you will. And as well as any reprints and relevant cards that we didn't talk about in part 1. We're trying to be as comprehensive with this review while simultaneously talking about only the important, notable parts. So without any further ado, we have to talk about what we are drinking. I am still drinking Fireball because I'm an idiot and bought too big of a bottle. Ugh.
Yeah, I feel sorry for you that, that might be what you're drinking over the next few episodes. I'm drinking my Sea Quench Sour Session Ale, one of my favorite drinks. I drank it last episode, and, it's pretty good. It kind of feels like it fits in the Zendikar theme, just because at least, the can is green, and Zendikar's, very green in terms of, it has a lot of land, so that kind of works, I think.
It's thematic.
Yeah, that's the best I could do. I'm drunk, because we recorded the first episode, and now this is the second episode that we're recording, back to back, so, you're really gonna just watch our downward spiral from here.
Learn from our mistakes, kids.
Or don't. I'd say that this is the best way to talk about card games because, you really get to give your, true initial, this is how I really feel. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to, censor myself. I'm not trying to, give you, the clean, goody two-shoes version. No, I'm giving you my raw feelings as we talk about this. I'm going off script, baby.
Oh, no. Stick to the show notes.
Okay. Well, if I'm sticking to the show notes, one thing before we do talk about Zendikar Rising is that we do want to thank everyone for subscribing to our channel. We recently hit 100 subscribers, and we are very appreciative of that. We did a giveaway where we, gave away Force of Will, an altar I did, where it has, Spirited Away. And to kind of celebrate or go off on our quest to 200 subscribers, we're doing another giveaway where it's the Lo-Fi Hip-Hop Chill Girl on Ristic Study. It's one of the most popular altars that I've ever done, and I'm happy to give it away. And yeah, maybe we'll get to 200 very quickly, and then we can do something from 200 to 300. If you're already subscribed to the channel, you're automatically entered in now. And we will do the giveaway once we hit 200 subscribers. So thank you everyone for listening now, and we hope that you have a great time.
Yes, thank you. We really do appreciate it. It's been a huge milestone. But without any further ado, let's talk about Zendikar Rising, and let's talk about the notable reprints. There's technically 2 that we want to talk about, which is Lotus Cobra and Negate. I play Lotus Cobra. It does a lot of work, makes a lot of mana. I enjoy it. Negate as well.
Yeah, Lotus Cobra I think is the more prominent of the 2 reprints, at least in the Zendikar packs you could open, just because it was a very expensive card. I think I actually bought mine when it was around $20, but I hope that this brings it down to less than 10. And Negate is just a good blue counterspell.
And that was not the only reprint. We also had the resurgence of Expeditions. We had all 10 fetch lands, which was really notable. but it also had Prismatic Vista, Ancient Tomb, Cavern of Souls, Wasteland and Strip Mine. There was Horizon Canopy, Grove of the Burn Willows, Creeping Tar Pit, Celestial Colonnade, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, 5 of the Czech lands, and 5 new Battle Bond lands.
No, the 5 original Battle Bond lands.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So, this was actually... No, now that I'm reviewing this set, I forgot about this, but it really is probably one of the highlights of this set, is the fact that they are being reprinted. All of these really amazing lands that are relevant to Commander.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be upset to see any of these in my pack. I think maybe the only like 2 or 3 that I'm not so keen on is like Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, Creeping Tar Pit, and Celestial Colonnade. I know Valakut is kind of a staple when it comes to Zendikar. It's a very important like land feature, so I think I'll give it a pass because, you know, it's just thematically so great. But I think a lot of these are awesome. I'm happy with their choices. All 10 fetch lands, that's great. The important thing
can we talk about that?
The important thing to note, though, is like, just because they're being reprinted, if you do play standard, these aren't standard legal. They're only the only ways that you can get these expeditions are either by buying a box. You'll get 1 non-foil in your box. You will get, in a normal booster box, you'll get 1 if you buy a set booster box in non-foil. If you buy a collector booster, you'll get 2 in non-foil. But in your collector boosters, if you open up a pack, you could potentially open up a foil one of these.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about the fetch lands. On one hand, I'm really happy that we're getting them. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's going to be enough to lower the price on fetch lands enough to where all the people who want fetch lands can get them. So, I mean, it's better than nothing. Like, we're also supposed to get some of them in Modern Horizons 2 in 2021. But I have mixed feelings. I'm not sure how I feel about it.
I agree. It's a little misleading because the way that WotC's been framing this, oh, don't worry, we're going to be reprinting the enemy fetch lands in another set later this year. This isn't a substantial reprint. It's not that they're at the normal rarity that they are in like any other set. It's just maybe you'll get one of these, like a 1 in 7 or 1 out of 8 chance. I forget like what the actual odds are. Also, I guess another important thing to note about this is kind of like this return of expeditions. Are you concerned at all, Blake, that like, you know, these collector piece cards can just now be reprinted as well? Because that's oftentimes been one of the driving points for me, at least when I buy some of these cards, is, oh, this rarer alternate art is less sought after, but it's okay. I can now buy it and kind of like hold some of like the value of its money. You know, it's kind of worth something. The payoff was good. Kind of like when you had Amonkhet and you could buy some of those like Egyptian cards. But now it just seems like WotC can do this whenever they want. It's not like they're on the reserve list.
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure how I feel. Expeditions definitely are a premium product, so however you feel about premium products, you probably feel that way about these cards. I don't know, just like, I don't mind it as much. I just maybe have an issue with when fetchlands are such key game pieces in certain formats that they're being capped at such a high price point as premium products. I think that might be my one issue, but I'm still kind of forming my opinion on that.
Okay. I was just kind of curious, because like to me, like, I don't mind that they reprint cards to the point where, you know, they can be cheaper. But when I want to buy the foil expedition, I want to make sure that, you know, that foil expedition is at least something that can retain its value, because it's, you know, kind of like the bling. There can be like, if Scalding Tarn Expedition was sold for $150 and I wanted to pay for that version versus Scalding Tarn $40, whatever, I would just want to make sure that when I buy that expedition, you know, I can, like, keep it as, like, you know, this is kind of like the bling of my deck.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind that they reprint the other like, bling version, because I do want people to be able to get them, but the fact that I want this expedition at a higher rarity, I just want to make sure that I can keep its value.
Sure. And one thing I want to say before we move on is thank you, WotC, for making these in both foil and non-foil, and on top of that, that you made the art colorful, because the issue I had with previous Zendikar expeditions is that they all look the fucking same, because I looked across the table and they all just looked the same. They're all like very dark foiled cards, and I couldn't tell what colors of mana they were holding up because they all look the fucking same. Just thank you for making it like obvious with the frame and the pin lines and the colorful art. I'm actually going to be able to tell from these colorful cards what my opponents are holding up mana wise. Thank you. That was pissing me off a few times I've had to play against it.
Yeah, I agree. That is a very good point to bring up. I do think that these new expeditions are much more colorful. I do love the new border that they have. So, you know, I'm just, I guess, you know, I am a little sad that maybe they're not going to be as accessible as we'd like them to be. Because you can't get these in your normal set boosters. You have to buy, like, these collector boosters, almost. It's the incentive now to buy those.
Yeah, so I'd like to move on to the new lands from this set. And it's also a new mechanic. It's the Modal double-faced cards. These are cards with two sides, one being a land. Yes, you heard me right. These are lands with two sides. One side is a land, and the other side can be either an enchantment, a sorcery, an instant, or a creature. Fucking weird. When they are in your hand, you have the option to play them on either side. You have to choose. You can't just like play them and flip them over to the other side. You have to choose right then and there. And it's really, really interesting design space. Guy, what do you think about this?
I love this, because I think that this is going to be a deck building challenge for people in the future, just because, you know, you now have to like really think about the number of lands that you put in and these module dual face cards, because, you know, you can maybe now take out a few lands, but you don't want to take out enough lands where now you just have a bunch of these module dual face cards as tap lands, because right now, other than the Mythic cycle, all of them have either enchantment, sorcery, instant, creature, and then on the other side, where it's a land, it enters the battlefield tapped. So I think that that's kind of the one downside we're seeing at the moment, is that none of these stand out as like particularly strong, but it's also like drawing two cards in one, so it's cool. I think they've talked about how this is going to be a mechanic that we see for the next two sets, for core sets, that is. So Kaldheim, which is the Viking set that will take place in early January, and then Strixhaven, which is the Hogwarts kind of school set that we're going to be going to in like Q2 of next year. And they said that we'll be seeing more module dual face cards there, where it's maybe a little more creative. So maybe we'll see some like creatures on one side and enchantments on the other side. So this is kind of like testing the waters right now.
Right. And I think they're starting off very cautiously. I think both you and I agree that the spell side of these lands are highly costed given their effect. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Because I feel like this could have very easily been a broken mechanic if they had made these cards like low CMC for the effects that they're given. Like, the design space is kind of trying to circumvent the mana screw, mana flood problem that exists particularly in Magic the Gathering trading card game. And, like, I don't blame them. I don't want them to break the game and, like, just have all of these become instant staples in every format they're played in.
Yeah, I don't think of them as staples for any of the monocolor decks that we got. Of the Mythic cycle, it's kind of hard to say like which one's actually the best, just because they are so high costed. It might be the white one or the blue one. It's tough. It's just tough.
Yeah. I don't expect to see them too much. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just not looking forward to like Commander players cutting like 3 lands and then putting these in and then like asking, why am I getting mana screwed every time they try to cast the spell side of them? I'm not looking forward to that, so be cautious. Stop, all you Commander players, stop cutting lands. Like, you're being too greedy.
Yeah, I would, if you're going to try doing the module dual face cards, I would only maybe do 2 or 3 to like test out. And you probably also only want to be playing these cards when you have like a lower CMC to begin with, like in your deck as an average. So, yeah. But Blake, what about these next new set of like cards? They're the new dual lands that Mark Rosewater has talked about.
Yeah, they're the air quotes dual lands. Dual modal double-faced lands. So there's the green, white, white, black, blue, black, red, green, white, red, and blue, red versions. And they're all kind of called the pathways. I'm not going to list all of their names exactly, but they're all basically called the pathways. And again, I think it's really cool design, but like from a dual land standpoint, I think that they're very, very weak. Because again, it's not like you can play them and then, oh, now I need the other color, let me flip this over and use the other color. No, as you play them, you have to choose that color and you're stuck with only that color for the rest of the game. Unless you can somehow like bounce it to your hand and like replay it, but that's like a lot of workaround.
It is a little workaround. I know that like players do like that one like bounce land cycle where it's like, as this enters the battlefield, return a land to your hand, and then you can like
if you have the budget, just play good lands instead.
Well, yeah, but like in the casual mindset,
sure,
like maybe
that's always the caveat. Like if you're on a budget, then yeah, it's understandable to play these lands.
Yeah, and so I know that you and I don't typically play with tap lands that much, just because we look for like you and I are I would say like casually competitive, and so we don't typically play with those like lands that enter the battlefield tapped. But what would you prefer to play, I guess? Would you prefer to play one of these where you pick a side, or would you rather play with a card that enters the battlefield tapped initially but can still tap for both colors?
You know, that's a good question. I honestly, depending on whether my deck can search out basics a lot, I might just stick with basics.
But I'm not saying basics. I'm saying like a Guild Gate. A Guild Gate enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for 2 colors. This is something that could tap for one of those 2 colors, but it enters the battlefield untapped, but you can only pick one of those colors.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I still think I by default always default back to basics. I don't think that these are really worth it.
Okay. I do like these, and I think in that case that I just talked about, I think I'd rather run these over the Guild Gates, those kind of lands. I think the one downside too is that they just don't have the basic land type on them, so it's not like it's a forest.
That's what I was saying. It's like it's not a basic. Like certain cards search out basics, so like you can't search these out. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay, now I understand. Sorry, alcohol.
Oh my God.
And so I know that there's only 6 of them right now, but we are getting the other 4 in Kaldheim, so keep an eye out for that. Because I was very salty that the Golgari one wasn't here.
Oh my God, you'll be fine. But your Get Rod deck will be fine.
I actually don't feel like these will make play in CDH, if I'm being honest.
I know, because they're not that good. That's what I'm trying to say.
Alright, well, let's now get into the other 99. So we typically do like the land stuff at the end, but we're now getting lands out of the way. And so, yeah, monocolored cards. Let's go. White's first.
Alright, we have Archon of Emeria. It is 2 and a white. Creature Archon, 2/3 with flying. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Huh. So this is a really great hate bear. It's basically a rule of law effect stapled onto a Thalia Heretic Cathar. All in one card. I love this shit. This is gonna see play.
I love this shit too. This is a great card. And, you know, it's flying as well. I feel like part of the problem with hate bears some of the times is that they are just smaller, kind of like creatures on the ground that can't help protect you. But I feel like this is good. It's still pretty cheap, 2 and a white for both of these effects. And each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. That's not just saying like on your turn you can only cast 1 spell. That's on like if you're on your opponent's turn as well, you can still only cast 1 spell per turn. So it's very, very limiting.
Right. And there are some decks that can take advantage of this. This might actually see some competitive EDH play because it's just a strictly better Eidolon of Rhetoric. And hate bears can be quite good at that end of the format. Alright, yeah, I'm excited about this card. Alright, we're off to a good start. Do you want to read the next card?
Angel of Destiny. 3 white, creature, Angel Cleric. It is a 2/6, which is pretty weak for an Angel. It does have flying and double strike, so kind of makes up for it, I suppose. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. Interesting. At the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 life more than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attack this turn loses the game. Whoa. So the nice thing to point out is that it doesn't have to deal the damage, it just has to attack the opponent. And the thing about this for me is I don't think you want to be playing this when you're like borderline 15 above your starting life total. So it's not like you want to be attacking when you have 55 life, because then what if your opponent just has some way of like lightning bolting you, and then you're not going to be able to get this effect go off. You probably want to be playing this closer to your endgame strategy when you are further ahead and have like, I don't know, 40 to 50 extra life in those types of decks where you do have like a lot of life gain, so that it's safe for you to attack and then, you know, just kill an opponent out of nowhere. It kind of reminds me of Phage, the Untouchable in a way. Yeah, I do think that this will be a very good piece in like Lyra Dawnbringer decks, because, you know, she is an angel tribal and she gives all your angels lifelink.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because angels are one of those creature types that are just printed in almost every set. You know, dragons are red and goblins are red and demons are black, so you always see a bunch of demons. So angels, especially in EDH, there's always a lot of angel tribal decks, and so I think for that reason alone, this will see some level of play in the Commander format. I also have a lot of thoughts about this card because it is a win con within white, so that's something that R&D has been shifting towards, is creating more win cons in mono white. And this also converts life gain into a way to win, which has been like one of the biggest critiques inside the Commander format. It's like, okay, cool, you can do life gain in Commander, but it does jack shit. It's never going to win you the game. This actually converts life gain into a win. And it is technically not as powerful as, say, Felidar Sovereign or Test of Endurance, which just kind of ask you to have a somewhat high life total and then you automatically win the game. But players typically get bored of playing those cards because they're very linear and boring. Whereas with this card, it kind of asks you to jump through a couple hoops, and if your opponents don't immediately answer the Felidar Sovereign, they just immediately die. And so they always get rid of the Felidar Sovereign and people take it out of their decks. Whereas this card, alright, you gotta jump through a couple hoops, so I'm not really going to worry about this. And so come your next turn, there's a good chance it survived a rotation of the table, and then you hopefully do an explosive turn and win the game. It's an awesome casual card, in my opinion. I like this.
I'd say, definitely on the higher side of casual. It's definitely not going to be like a competitive card, but it definitely feels like you have to work for the win, rather than Felidar Sovereign is just kind of, or like Test of Endurance, or it's just kind of a build your deck around to get to that board game state and then you just kind of coast. So it's interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other kind of white cards will do stuff that are similar to this. And I do also like how it's not just like you win the game, it's certain opponent loses, which is good because it's not like completely symmetrical. It's more like you're taking out one person at a time. So you could have this as a couple clones because it isn't legendary, so that is nice. But it's also not that broken, I guess. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah, and before we move on, if anyone was questioning, this does not work with Blade of Selves. You're not able to. Due to the specific wording, you can't just make a bunch of copies of this angel and just kill all of your opponents simultaneously. I'm not going to get into the exact reasons why, but just want to be clear, this does not perfectly synergize with Blade of Selves.
Oh, yeah, because Blade of Selves exiles the tokens at the end of combat, so those tokens aren't around to have their triggers go off.
Yeah, there's a lot of specific rule nuances, and I'm not a judge of any kind. I can just tell you that it doesn't work the way you think it does with Blade of Selves. Sorry.
Yeah, I had to check that myself, because I was like, why wouldn't it work? But I didn't realize it gets rid of the tokens.
Alright, we're going to move into blue, and I need to talk about this card. So, it is Confounding Conundrum. It is 1 and a blue. It's an enchantment that says, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. So, what does this actually do? This really screws fetch lands, but only if they're cracked on the same turn they're played. So, your opponents can wait until the next player's turn and kind of get around this effect, so they're not actually that good against fetched lands. And that being said, it's strong against casual land-based ramp like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach and Rampant Growth and more. So I just want to warn people who are planning to play this card that casual players may actually get kind of mad at you because they don't like you messing up with their lands. So, on top of explaining what this card actually does, I want to explain why this card makes sense as a blue card, and that the argument for it to have been white is pretty weak, because when this card got revealed, a lot of people were asking, why isn't this a white card? It should have been a white card. And so I want to directly address why it makes sense as a blue card. So, let's look at that first ability, ETB, draw a card. This has never occurred in white besides Wall of Omens and Lash Knife Barrier. while blue has this effect in over 24 cards. Now, there are about 6 white auras that draw on ETB, but blue has 10 of those. So, just on this first ability alone, you can see that blue does this way, way, way more historically than white. So let's move into the second ability. And it is a land disruption effect because it's returning a land to the hand, which white has never done this before. Never. And, okay, well, technically, there was one white card, which happened in this set that returned a land to your hand, and it was a really forgettable card called Tazim Raptor, but that's it. White does not bounce lands to their hand. And white typically interacts with lands by getting rid of almost all the lands. Think of spells like Armageddon, Ravages of War, Catastrophe, Fall of the Thran, Cataclysm, Balance, Limited Resources. It's always been blue that has been returning lands to the hand and stalls your opponent's land drops. Think of Land Equilibrium, Mana Breach, Mana Vortex, Overburden, Sunder, Planar Overlay, all of these cards. And, like, on a side note, both blue and white affect lands tapping and untapping, so I'm not really considering that too much in this analysis. But in both of these abilities, it's obviously blue is the color historically that does these effects, not white. So I think people saw this card and emotionally reacted to this instead of logically reacting to this. And it makes more sense in blue.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. Personally, I think I was one of those people who did initially act on the emotional basis where I was like, why isn't this a white card? Or I want it to be white.
Because we want white to be good in EDH, don't we? We want it to be good.
Right, and I think that's kind of, still where players' upset stems from, is just that they're just tired of seeing not great white support after set after set. Like, sometimes we get something, but like something like this where it seems like it could be a white card because white is often about balance and equilibrium, but the way that this is worded and this is affected, it just doesn't work out the way that, it was meant to. And I think, with the way that Zendikar is supposed to be returning lands to your hand, you kind of want to get like multiple land drops per turn, or not multiple land drops per turn because that's against what this does, and it kind of like punishes players for doing that. So that's kind of like, this is kind of like the hoser for the strategy, because it's not like you want to build a strategy and just make it so strong. You do still want to have answers for those landfall decks. And I think that this is probably the place that we should be seeing this, is the set where it's going to be most prevalent.
Sure, like, I think you and I both want white to be good in Commander, but I think we both agree that you shouldn't completely break the color pie trying to do so. Yeah?
Yeah, I agree with that there.
Alright, I've had my rant. We can move on.
Alright. Next we have Thieving Skydiver. It's 1 in a blue, creature, merfolk, rogue. 2/1. It has kicker for X. X can't be 0, and if you remember from our last episode where we talked about kicker, you pay the kicker cost as you are casting it, and in this case X is a variable, so it can be any amount of mana that you want it to be except 0. It does have flying, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. I like that you have to pay mana if you're going to steal 0 cost artifact, because otherwise it would feel just a little too strong. I've seen comparisons for this card to Gilded Drake, but I don't think it's quite on like Gilded Drake power level, just because Gilded Drake will often try and steal someone's commander, which then shuts down the entire deck strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So this feels good. I think that, most of the time you can probably play this on turn 3 and then get someone's Soul Ring, so that's good for you. And I do think that if it's an equipment, you can attach it to Thieving Skydiver. That's a nice extra little clause there too, because it's then getting around the equipment cost as well.
Yeah, I think that this card is good, but it's not like OP and ban worthy, which I saw a couple people say. It's like, because at worst case scenario, it like has nothing to target and it's just a boring 2/1 flyer for 2. And like best case scenario is like what you said, where like you spend 3 mana to steal someone's Soul Ring or Mana Crypt or Skull Clamp or something. And even that, it's not like, oh wow, this is like unbeatable to play against versus other powerful cards at 3 CMC. Like, I don't understand why people are saying like, oh, this needs to be banned. It's like you can't even abuse the ETB effect. It's not even like if you flicker this card that you can like steal all of your opponent's artifacts, because every time it ETBs, it checks that it was kicked. And if it wasn't kicked, you don't steal the artifact. So you can't even abuse the ETB trigger, which that's kind of the whole point of ETB triggers, is that you can like flicker them and abuse them. But you can't even do that for this card. So I don't understand what people are talking about, man.
Yeah, because Kicker is being checked when you cast the spell, and so when it enters the battlefield, it's not being recast, so it's never going to be re-kicked again. So, okay, guys.
It's fine. It's fine.
I guess players always need something to complain about, and I think that this is probably the card for that time.
Dude, I don't know. This next card we're going to talk about, I saw a lot of people be like, this needs to be banned.
Oh, Jesus Christ. If it's not, I'm quitting Magic.
Oh, God. So this next card is Maddening Cacophony. It is 1 in a blue sorcery with kicker, 3 in a blue. Each opponent mills 8 cards, but if this spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So I saw a lot of players just losing their goddamn minds over this card, and not in a good way. And yes, if it's kicked, it does combo with Bruvac to almost guarantee you to win the game, because you like mill half their library and the Bruvac mills the other half of their library. But like, it's a 2-card combo, and like honestly, in the grand scope of things of the EDH format, there's way better 2-card combos. I also saw a lot of people getting confused about this card, about, oh, isn't this just a worse Traumatize? Traumatize only mills one opponent half their library, whereas this card, if it's kicked, it's each opponent. So that's the difference between the 2 cards. It's fine, guys. Like, I don't know. Mill has always existed in this weird spot where you either casually play it and manually mill out your opponents, or you just go full combo, mill them out, and that's how you win. Mill's in a weird spot, and this is not busted. It's fine, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, this is also, taking into consideration that your opponents aren't running any of the Eldrazi that shuffle the graveyard back into, your library, or, Gaia's Blessing, those kind of cards that kind of refresh your library. I won't be surprised if we get some more cards like that soon, because of cards like Bruvac and Maddening Cacophony. Yeah, I mean, it's fine, I guess. Like, Mill's, I know we did a whole episode on Mill, but like, it's kind of become a meme where it's like, yeah, if you can win with Mill, like, oh, good for you. Like, it's more of a meme at this point, and it's kind of funny because
it's always been a meme.
Well, they've also just now keyworded Mill to being Mill, so that's what's funnier to me, is like the more that they like try and push mill, the more the meme becomes.
I've also seen some people say like, "Oh my gosh, this new keyword mill is completely OP," and I'm just like,
what do you mean?
No one's told you that this has been around for a while, have they?
Yeah, mill's been around, I don't know, probably longer than you've been born, so shut up.
Probably.
I'm already going on the record and saying, if you can beat Blake in mill, he'll buy you a drink.
Oh, that's confirmed.
Yeah.
I'll share some of my fireball. How about that? I have so much. Please help.
I just imagine us now showing up to like Command Fest and someone beats you with mill, or beats you in some of the other ways that we've said, like, oh yeah, I'll buy you a drink, and then you just pull out a fireball like glass that's not even like half empty at that point, and you're just like, here's a shot. So I hope you like fireball, because that's now what Blake is getting you.
Confirmed. Meet me at Command Fest.
When COVID's all over, or when it's safe to do so.
Anyway, we should move on.
Yeah, this next card's pretty spicy. Seagate Stormcaller, 1 in a blue, creature, human, wizard. It's a 2/1. It also has kicker. When it enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 2 or less you cast this turn when you cast it. If it was kicked, copy that spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copies. Now, the cool part about this, though, is you can flicker this and get the ETB trigger to go off once again for copying it once at least, because it's only checking if it was kicked to copy it twice. So that's a little like distinction there between this and like the Skydiver that we just talked about. I see this card being talked about in the CEDH community because they're like, you know, it makes their consultation lines a little easier. And if you don't know what that means, like, go watch our episode where we talk with Brayden. Really funny guy, talks a lot about CEDH, the competitive side. But I mean, the general line is like, you know, you play Demonic Consultation, you get rid of your whole deck, then you play Thassa's Oracle, and then you win the game. So this would just allow you to play Demonic Consultation, you then declare Thassa's Oracle, you find Thassa's Oracle, and then you get a second Demonic Consultation, you declare some other card that's not in your deck, you like get rid of your whole library, and then you play Thassa's Oracle and you win the game. So it's kind of like finding your second piece. So it almost takes the place of like having Thassa's Oracle in your hand, but you do have to make sure that you, one, have the mana like open to cast it, and I guess, I mean, you gotta make sure that you have some kind of protection as well, which this could be, like if you want to cast this and kind of like bait out the counter spells at least. So, I don't know. Could go well with a Thassa or Conjurer's Closet, kind of like deck that does those like ETB trigger blink shenanigans, because you can get, again, that first copy instant or sorcery spell. And I mean, blue has a lot of good mana cost 2 or less spells. Like even counter spell you could maybe like copy twice, so pretty good.
Yeah, like even if it doesn't see CEDH play, because it's really hard for any card to have a high enough card quality to penetrate that end of the format. Even if it can't, like, you know, in casual, like, hey, copying an instant or sorcery that you play next isn't always half bad, because there's a lot of, like you said, really good 2 CMC or less instant sorceries. I might see this card every once in a while, I anticipate.
Yeah, I see this in the more casual competitive or the like competitive format. Not really a casual card. So anyway, let's go on to black.
Alright, so the next card is Feed the Swarm, 1 and a black, sorcery. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. So, this card was talked about a lot when it was first previewed, so I just want to clear things up that this is not a color pie break. It's a color pie evolution. R&D has slowly been giving Black the ability to answer enchantments. Historically, we've had Mire and Misery in C19, then we were given Farika's Libation in Theros Beyond. And yes, this is a little bit better than the previous two because it can target directly instead of just like letting the opponent choose which enchantment they want to sacrifice. But now white, black, and green can answer enchantments, and white, red, and green can answer artifacts. And to anyone concerned like, oh, WotC's just throwing out the color pie completely, don't worry, they've said on record that like black isn't going to suddenly start being able to answer artifacts. The idea is that each color should have trouble answering a certain permanent type. You know, like black is going to have trouble with artifacts, green is going to have trouble with other creatures, red is going to have problems with enchantments, etc., etc. So don't be concerned that the color pie is breaking. R&D is doing this very specifically because for a long time there were multiple permanent types that black could not answer.
Yeah, the thing that I just kind of want to add on to that discussion of the evolution is that it's not game-centric for each color to be able to deal with like all permanent types, whereas sometimes, you know, the complaint that like white needs to draw cards, but that is what they've found to be like a game-centric thing that, you know, you need to do. So they've been looking for ways for like white to draw cards, and you know, they just found that like black, it makes sense for them to, you know, be able to deal with enchantments, not artifacts, and then it's kind of like vice versa, where red can deal with artifacts and can't deal with enchantments. So it's just kind of like the two different sides where when it comes to like game-centric things, WotC is trying to make sure that all colors have access to those. But something like this where it's not so much game-centric, but it's just something that flavorfully makes sense, because black's motto is like whatever the cost. So it is able to destroy this enchantment, but you're losing converted mana cost. And I don't know, I do look forward to seeing like what else, just because I thought, you know, the ways that initially black was getting this like enchantment removal was very interesting, since it felt more like a choice, but now it does feel more on like the black side where it's like, yeah, this should work. So yeah, I'm excited, and it's still, I think, confirmed to be like a tertiary effect. So it's not like we're going to be seeing this in every set, kind of like I think in, you know, most sets we see red dealing with artifacts in some kind of way, or we see black dealing with creatures in some sort of way. This is more like a 1 in every 3 set kind of thing. So
right,
yeah, feels fine.
That being said, like, I do feel like, I mean, I'm hesitant to say the phrase staple, but I do feel like this might be a new mono black staple, just because historically black has had almost no way of dealing with enchantments.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they come up with in the future. Blake, I'll let you talk about this next card, because I was just like, whatever. And I really want to talk about some of these red cards that are coming up.
Right. Okay, so like I'll talk about this next card really quickly, because I do feel like it's important to talk about in this set review. It is Demon's Disciple. It is 2 and a black. It's a creature, human cleric, 3/1, that says when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. And the reason I mentioned this card is because it does join the group of edict creatures that say when it ETBs, like each player sacrifices a creature. And, you know, you often see Merciless Executioner, Fleshbag Marauder, Plague Crafter, all because these are creatures that have the same effect at 3 CMC. You don't see Slum Reaper because it's at 4 CMC, but Demon's Disciple is also at 3 CMC, so it will see play. I just see like these kinds of effects all the time when I go to my local game store, and you can expect to see this card as well.
Great. Now we can move on to red. And I am so excited to talk about this first card. Roiling Vortex. 1 in a red, enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. And then red, activated ability, your opponents can't gain life this turn. So, I just feel like this card was made for me. This is perfect for...
It really was.
It really was, and I think this was the card that we mentioned in our episode before we did Zendikar Rising, where we were like, good cards for burn decks, because it does stop players from gaining life. So, we already kind of like pre-alluded to this a little bit, but this is like a good staple for those burn decks that everyone's going to be building now. Players do like to not pay mana for spells, so not only is it going to like punish people for cheating stuff in when they cast it, but it is also going to punish a lot of those like 0 mana artifacts as well. Now it is a symmetrical effect, so that does affect you as well, but who cares? Like, this is burn, baby!
Yeah, I feel like this is specifically pandered to any deck that wants an effect that says your opponents can't gain life, like your Pervros deck guy.
Yeah, definitely this... I think in Core Set 2021, I was like borderline on a few cards. This is definitely a card that's going to be making its way. It's only 1 in a red. That's also like the French kiss of this, where it's just so cheap. It does so much. Oh my god.
And it's an enchantment, so I give my seal of approval because I'm an enchantment slut.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much.
Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like the second ability where it says whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, it deals 5 damage to that player. 5 damage is actually beginning to be relevant in the Commander format. And I don't know, people really like to either cast spells for free or cast spells that are like 0 CMC.
Yeah, for sure. Like, you know, we do often see like deal 2 damage, deal 3 damage. No. 5 damage. So, yeah, this is pretty good.
Guy, I feel like you also deserve to talk about this next card, because it feels very you as well.
Oh, yes. Okay, let me read the card first. Leyline Tyrant. 2 red creature dragon, 4/4, flying. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. When Leyline Tyrant dies, you may pay any amount of red. When you do, it deals that much damage to any target. So it's like Omnath Locus of Mana, but for red. It's a dragon, and I am very happy, and I do think that this is another card that I could definitely see making its way into my Perforos deck. I just am like, you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end? Like, is that a red thing? Like, it doesn't feel red flavorfully, and I'm not trying to complain necessarily. It's just like, it feels so out of place, and I'm like, okay, I'll take it, but like, we've never done this before. I don't know. I'm happy, and I'm just like confused. I'm not mad. It is also 2 red, so it is pretty cheap. It makes that cut. Most of the cards I consider for Perforos are like 5 or less. So like this is like, okay. Like that was kind of the tipping point for Terror of the Peaks, because it was 5 mana. This is 4 mana. So I'm like, okay. This is okay. Yeah.
Because it also makes all of the like giant like ritual effects, like Mana Geyser and Firing Crag feat, really relevant. Because you could actually make all those. Yeah, because you can make all this mana, and it doesn't just become useless. You can actually like essentially dump it into something.
Yeah, and the nice thing too is, like, you know, if it dies, it's a bomb. If, you know, let's say your friend kills it. Okay, I have 10 red mana in my red pool, which seems like a lot, but, like, you know, play your cards right, and that's... This card works so well with, like, Citadel of Pain, which is that 1 red enchantment that says, yeah, you gotta tap your lands before your turn ends, or else it's gonna deal damage to you. So you're like, yeah, I'm gonna tap all my lands, I'll keep the red mana, and I'm also not going to be able to, like, you know, take any damage from that. But I still have this red mana that I can use at my disposal. But anyway, getting back to, like, yeah, so let's say your friend kills this dragon. You're then like, okay, I'm going to, like, deal you 10 damage. I don't know. I think this is a great card.
Yeah, I am inclined to agree. Like, if you're a mono red deck and you can find a way to make more mana than you spend each turn, this is a serious consideration. This is also why Braid of Fire is suddenly spiking in price, because, you know, usually that card sucks because as soon as it moves to the next phase, all that mana goes away. But with Leyline Tyrant, okay, now you can actually carry that mana across phases and actually use it in the phases of the game in which you can actually use it. Yeah, that's why that card is suddenly becoming much more expensive. Alright, I would like to move on to the next card now that Guy has had his orgasm. And I'd like to talk about Ancient Green Warden. It is 2 and a green. It's a 5/7. It's a creature elemental. Shit, you right. It is 4 green. It is a 5/7 creature elemental with reach. And it says, you may play lands from your graveyard. Okay. And it also says, if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So, a lot to unpack there. That third ability is just really good in terms of landfall, but it's also worded in a way where it applies not only to landfall, but other pseudo-landfall triggers. And if that wasn't good enough, because landfall is very relevant in all those lands matter decks in the Commander format, it also has that second ability which says you may play lands from your graveyard, which is the third time we've seen that effect. The other times have been Crucible of Worlds and Ramunap Excavator, which both see a fuck ton of play, because turns out playing lands from your grave is really fucking good. So I expect to see this card a lot when I go to my LGS, like a lot, because playing lands from your graveyard is really good, and doubling your landfall and pseudo landfall triggers is also really, really good.
Yeah, it feels very appropriately costed, where it's not going to be game breaking necessarily. It's kind of like Nyxbloom Ancient in that way, where it is like a good card. Like, the ability is great. Nyxbloom Ancient's problem was that it was just like really high costed and, like, you know, only going to see play in those casual formats. And I think that this is going to fall into that kind of like camp as well. But it's still good. Like, you know, any landfall deck that wants to run this it's not a bad choice. Okay, in terms of multicolor cards, we don't got any.
Nope.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. There weren't too many notable ones, unless if you're wanting to build around the party mechanic, which we talked about last time, and how it's not necessarily relevant in EDH. So we're going to move on to our colorless artifact cards. Blake, I think you have a little more to say about this first one.
Yep. So we have Lithoform Engine. It is 4 colorless. It's a legendary artifact with 3 activated abilities. It has 2 tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. 3 tap, Copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And then 4 tap. Copy target permanent spell you control. The copy becomes a token. So the idea behind this card is that it can copy almost any spell, basically. It is highly flexible because it, again, is trying to basically copy anything that you can possibly play. That first ability is really reminiscent of Strionic Resonator and Rings of Brighthearth. And the second ability of copying instants and sorceries, I'm not as keen on, because if you're going to copy instants and sorceries, you usually want that sort of effect on other instants and sorceries, so I don't feel like that's going to be as relevant. And as far as the third ability goes, copying a target permanent spell you control, that is pretty unique. We haven't really seen that on almost any other Magic card up until now, and I think the designers making each of the activated abilities tap is what really makes it balanced and keeps it from becoming like a degenerate combo piece. Because it has to tap, it's pretty much limited to once per turn, and you can't do a lot of shenanigan stuff with it. And I'm fine with that, I'm happy with that, because this is, again, also very flexible and versatile, where it's good, but it's also only going to be played in very specific decks, maybe like Riku of Two Reflections or Broodclad or other decks that are interested in copying certain things. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like it's... I don't know. In my opinion, this feels like it could be the next Paradox engine, in the sense that players are just going to shove this in their decks because they find it to be a good value piece, whereas I think the best decks that want to take advantage of this are going to kind of need to build around it a little bit. Though each of the abilities is pretty good in terms of like its flexibility, so I don't know, I think it'll just challenge people to really consider whether or not it is actually worth running in their decks. And I mean, I don't see this being a problem, but again, like, Paradox Engine was banned when we didn't think it should have been, so who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, I feel like that's apples to oranges. I'm not going to get into that, but this is definitely no Paradox Engine. We should talk about the final card.
The last card we have is Forsaken Monument. It's 5 colorless, legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. So it's an Anthem and a mana enhancer for colorless decks, which didn't really have one up until this point. So it feels like it can be a slam dunk in those decks. It helps with those utility lands like Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False, and Forsaken Gods, those kind of things, since it's any permanent tapping for colorless. So yeah, like also Soul Ring, Thrandanimo. It does go infinite with Basalt Monolith. I'm getting really fucking tired of seeing 2-card combos now with Basalt Monolith, but that's just, you know, I was all about that with like Basalt Monolith and Power Artifact, because it was like, this is the strongest thing ever in Magic, and now it's like, okay, so many cards can do this, and it's just generating infinite amounts of mana, and I'm like, ugh, I'm done. But yeah, this is like the one card I think that's like meant to like kind of reference the Eldrazi from, you know, past Zendikar sets. They said that the Eldrazi were gone, and this is kind of like the homage to that a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good card for colorless decks specifically.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think colorless decks are going to have a problem paying for 5 mana, because typically you're like, you know, you're playing lots of like other artifacts that give you colorless mana, so it's like Waste, Soul Ring, then you're at turn 2 and you already have 3 mana, another waste, another mana rock, and then turn 3 or 4 you could easily get this out, and then now all your stuff essentially taps for double, if not like an additional. So pretty good.
I would say that colorless decks are, next to, say, mono green decks, one of the best commander identities at ramping. So I feel like you're going to have no problem whatsoever if you're playing colorless to get this out and ramp, if you want to do that.
Yeah. Alright, so now we're into what's our best new 99 card. I think similar to our last episode when we talked about legendaries, our conclusion was like none of the legendaries were overly powerful or really going to be like standouts. And I think that's kind of the same here with like the best new 99. None of these cards feel like they're like a new Underworld Breach or Thassa's Oracle kind of card where it's just like just a new like meta break kind of card. We have Thieving Skydiver, Confounding Conundrum, Seagate, Stormcaller. Those cards are like strong, but I wouldn't say that they're going to be like the strongest. So it's just all for different reasons. So feels again very tame.
Yeah, because for me, there's not a specific card that shines above the rest.
No, I agree.
I can think of like maybe 1 or 2, but like compared to all the other cards, like there's not one that's like, oh yes, I am clearly the card that's going to be played most of all these cards.
Yeah, and that's great because I think that gives a lot of opportunity for these cards to shine. It's not, I have to go chase the new Mythic rare or this really good rare. Just any of these cards we could be seeing play as just kind of like test pieces, and maybe I mean, I feel like if one card was supposed to be like a standout slam dunk card, somebody would have thought of a way to break it by now, but who knows? Maybe in the future we will see something like that where they're like, oh no, Forsaken Monument actually is like too powerful. I don't know.
Okay, so we're nearing to the end of this episode, Guy. What are your overall final thoughts of this set? Like, pulling back, I know we've been talking about specific cards for like an hour, and if you just came from part 1, we've been talking about specific cards for like almost 2 hours now. What are like your big picture takeaway thoughts of this set? Do you feel like overall it was good, bad, somewhere in the middle?
For me, it lands somewhere in the middle in terms of power level, and that's fine. I didn't want a new Theros, or I didn't want like a new Commander 2020 where, you just have like, I don't see a lot of these cards breaking the high price tier. Like, there's no Fierce Guardianship or some like chase card that's gonna just be strong and like people are just gonna want to run it in their decks. This just feels very much like everything's equally balanced in that kind of way. In terms of, though, when we're talking about Zendikar and we're talking about the adventure theme, this didn't feel as adventurous in my mind. It just felt kind of, I don't know, like there weren't as many I was expecting a lot more artifacts in terms of like equipment, and I don't think we got too many that were worth mentioning. There's not even like the traps where, if you do something then you can activate this. It just, I don't know, flavorfully, other than the landfall, it didn't feel like Zendikar all that much. Oh, and the one other thing too, because we were probably going to go both episodes without even mentioning it. There were 3 new Planeswalkers. All of them were, like, okay for EDH. They're somewhat notable in, like, the way that they were designed, and maybe we'll talk about them in the future for some reason. But, yeah, I just want to, like, not go both episodes without having said that we acknowledge them. They are there. They are in this set.
You're talking, of course, about Jace, Nahiri, and Nissa.
Yes, those 3.
They weren't really EDH relevant, so we did not talk about them in this Commander set review, but yes, you're totally right. They are the 3 key pivotal characters in the lore for this set.
Yes, both Nissa and Nahiri come from Zendikar originally, and this was actually the first time that we saw Nahiri on her home plane. Very interesting. But yeah, just to go back to what I was saying, the only thing that it really felt about Zendikar was just that lands and landfall. Blake, what are your thoughts?
I have similar thoughts to you, where I'm kind of glad that it was a fairly nerfed set where there weren't too many powerful cards. We kind of just got a set where we could just like chill out and cool out for a minute or two. I do expect to see the party mechanic again in the Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set in 2021. I expect to see party and more adventure-themed, D&D themed stuff again.
If not party again, at least stuff to support party more.
But I'm expecting it, yeah. So, I don't know, this whole set was kind of like a mixed bag, again, especially because the lore was brought back to the Gathering website instead of being in these books that you could buy on the market. It was generally regarded as like a good trend. It's not perfect, but it's generally regarded as better. And another huge talking point was the fetch land reprints, which is what we kind of talked about earlier, also a mixed bag. So this whole set for me was kind of mixed. It wasn't like a slam dunk, but it wasn't like a complete failure either. It's kind of in the middle.
Okay. I guess the one last thing that probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but oh well. This set is kind of like Jumpstart, where it is experiencing some technical difficulties with its production. So there isn't going to be as much Zendikar as people initially wanted there to be. And unfortunately, that is also going to be the case with Commander Legends. So it's rough. Like, I think that's just gonna like add more fire to the flames when it comes to like this fetch land stuff, and I hope that, you know, WotC can either figure out some kind of solution, or they can figure out, or just like their printing processes are able to get back up to snuff when it comes to like, you know, everything's kind of like on hold right now because of coronavirus. So I just hope that also in the future, WotC acknowledges the fact that like some of this wasn't made to the demand of players, and that they're not just going to be like, yeah, that's old stuff, we don't need to make more of that now. I just hope that WotC will be like, yes, we know that we weren't up to the standard that we wanted to put out for everyone initially, so we are going to make sure that we retcon that, now being whenever in the future.
That's a good point, yeah. Because COVID's really fucked up their whole like production and supply and shipping demand.
Yeah. Alright. With that, we are the Wizard Staff Podcast. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube, and anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. You make sure to leave a like and review. You can definitely go to our YouTube channel, subscribe. Helps out a bunch. We are doing our Lo-Fi Hip Hop Chill and Relax Girl giveaway with a Ristic Study Altar. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at WizardStaff101. And you can send us an email at thewizardstaff101@gmail.com if you want to bitch and complain about how stupid we are. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope you have a great night. We'll see you real soon. Peace.
Peace.